what we're going to do is we're going to start building the main house. Okay, so what I've baked here is a really rich chocolate cake, sponge, not really sponge, more of a cake I suppose. I'll do that another time, the recipe for that. They're baked in 6-inch square tins. Okay, so I've baked about 7 or 8 of these. Okay, and what we're going to fill the individual layers with is a rich chocolate buttercream. So it's basically buttercream, 225 grams of icing sugar, 125 grams of melted butter, well, you know, whipped up butter, and into that we put 80 grams of melted chocolate. Okay, so it's quite a rich chocolatey buttercream. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to spread a layer, obviously on top of each one. Now it doesn't matter if it comes out the sides. Okay, we can scrape it off later, but also we're going to coat the whole thing in a chocolate ganache anyway. So just going to get a nice generous layer on there, and then we're going to find, wash my hand a minute, get our next layer. Okay, and we're just going to sit that on top of there. Okay, try and get it all square, and then just going to remove some of that excess for now and continue layering it up. So I'm going to put at least another layer on that. Okay, just having a look how high it is, and then when we come to forming the roof, I'll come back to you. So that's about as high as I want the main body of the house. Okay, so now I'm just going to stack a few more layers on top, and then we're going to shape them into the roof. So there we are, but although it's going to be the overall height, we're now going to shape the roof. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by going in about 3 centimetres and just marking a line, and then 3 centimetres in from the other side. And so this is what the flat bit of our roof, and then I'm just going to cut down through to this layer here at an angle, to shape our roof, and we have a nice bit of cake to try on later. So there you go, you can see that side's done. So now I'm just going to shape the other side. So there we go. Now you may have noticed, if you're paying attention, it's actually a little bit shorter. I decided after to cut the sides, it still looked a little bit too tall, so I just took that top thin layer of cake off and dropped it down to that. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to chill it, okay, and then we'll be preparing a chocolate ganache, which we will then cover the whole thing in, okay, and again let that chill down before we add the fondant icing. Now it may be you might want to consider just sort of taking the knife down the sides, but that might be better once it's chilled a bit, okay, and then we may just trim the sides up to keep them nice and flat, but that'd be better when it's a little bit harder, if you like. So given this time to sort of set a little bit, if you like, and I've made up some chocolate ganache. This is about 50-50, although I've gone a bit extra on the chocolate, whipping cream, and then a dark, quite high fat chocolate. Now it's been allowed to sort of cool, it's a little bit above room temperature at the minute, but what we're going to do is we're going to coat this, and although we want to try and get as smooth as possible, we will be giving it several coats. So I'm going to sort of start, and it's going to be a bit of a mess to begin with because this is still quite runny, this ganache. What we will do is, after we've coated the cake, we're then going to put it in the fridge and let it chill to basically set the ganache, and then we're going to bring it out and we're going to add another layer. So I've been building up multiple layers of ganache, okay, still looking a little bit rough, but we're going to apply one more layer, then I'm going to chill that. So we're going to, obviously that, forgot to turn that off, right? So we're going to try and smooth that a bit, but I may leave the final smoothing until it's chilled and we're ready to apply the fondant, because by then it will be a little bit easier, because of the ganache will have hardened, or hardened a bit more than it is at the minute, okay, and we can get some more smoother edges on it. But I've coated the whole thing, and like I say, I'm going to apply one more, but before I did, what I've done is take some measurements. So I've measured the side panels, okay, and I've got their measurements down for cutting out the fondant. I've also made a copy of that. I've put a piece of greaseproof over it so that I could draw the outline, and I've cut some end templates. I've cut a template for a door. Now that will be used to decide where we're going to cut the door, but I won't actually mark that out on one of the end panels until I know exactly where that panel is, or that door is, sorry. So they're ready to go. I've also measured out panels for the roof. So I've done the length so it will overhang a little bit, okay, by about 1 centimetre or so. And I've also made it so it's about 1 centimetre each side wider. And then I finally measured out a flat panel that will go on top that again overhangs by the same amount, okay. So when that's setting, we'll be able to be measuring out the fondant, because the fondant will want to dry for about an hour, okay. So all I'm going to do now is, like I say, I'm now just going to apply a final layer of ganache over that, and then it will be in the fridge, and then we'll start doing the fondant. So I've got a board that my cake will sit on. You might want a bigger one than this. I think this was a 9-inch. Let me just dump it. Okay, yeah, that's a 9-inch. Depending on how much surround you want on it. I mean, it is literally just what the cake's going to sit on. Well, what we're going to do first is we're going to take some green fondant, and we're going to roll that out, and we're going to cover that board with it, okay. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes trying to open the packet. So that's just about big enough to go over that, okay. And so all we're going to do is, to help stick that down, I'm just going to apply a little bit of edible glue, because this isn't, it's no good putting water down on this because it's not going to stick, because it's too shiny. And then we'll cover it over and trim it. So that's the board covered with green. Now I've got a little bit of green left over. I still need a little bit, but obviously to try and keep this fresh as possible, keep it in an airtight bag. So I've got a Ziploc bag there for that for later. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly texture it all over, because this is meant to resemble the grass. Okay, now obviously I don't need to do the whole board because the cake's going to sit on it, but I certainly need to make sure I've just gone around the edges. It's quite a thin layer of fondant, this one, so I'm really just going to just do a little impression on it. If it was thicker, you might want to sort of gouge it up a little bit, but I'm now just going to get that all done, and then we'll be ready to start rolling the fondant panels. So I've got the panels rolled out, so I've got my two sides, got my two ends as it were. I've got the flat panel on the roof and the two side panels on the roof. So what I'm going to do is add some like texture lines along the sides of the panels. Okay, so I'm using a little ball end, and I'm just going to press along some indents. Okay, they can be rough and ready. They're meant to represent obviously the lines between the two panels. fondant is perhaps a little soft still at the moment, but like I say, it's meant to be sort of like almost like a wood panel effect, so it doesn't matter if it's a little bit rough and ready. And what we will do later, when this has dried a bit more, we'll be touching it up with some black metallic edible paint. Okay, so I'm just going to go and continue trying where possible to get them to semi-match, but it doesn't really matter because it's all just made of wood panels, isn't it? So just finishing off this last panel with this paint, which I must say it's black metallic, but I would say it's more of a like a silvery grey colour. So that's them done. So now we're just going to let that dry for about an hour, and we'll keep that chilling for about an hour, and then we'll be ready to start assembling the cake. So the fondant panels are still drying, but at this point what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my door. So I'm just going to lightly attach the template where I want it, and then we're just going to mark around that door with a knife. And then I'm just going to remove that panel because we'll want that for when we cut the shape in the panel. So now I'm just going to cut in a bit deeper so that we can remove a small amount of the cake along with the ganache. So I'm just peeling that out, and I'm just going to remove a little bit more of the cake. Oops, come on the floor. So I think that will do. And now what I'm going to do is just put that back in the fridge to have a little clean up, and then we're going to attempt to move the cake onto that. Okay, and then we can begin the process of covering it in the fondant. So there we go, there's the cake on the green base. Okay, like I say, you might want a slightly bigger cake board on the bottom if you want a little bit more showing. I can see I need to just patch a little bit of green around there. Now I was going to use some of that green, I said you want to keep that, because if you just mix up some water, get it a bit of a sticky paste, you can use that to glue the cake down, but that cake's really big and heavy, we don't need to glue that to the base. But what I will do is I will touch up around that rim with a little bit of green. Okay, and I might even as well, while I'm at it, get a little bit more texture in the bit that's actually exposed. So we're still not quite ready yet to attach our fondant panels, but what we're going to do is we're going to use some melted chocolate. So you may have noticed I've got some in there, okay, to act as our glue. So I need to melt that down, because what we're going to do before we do anything else is we're going to put a thin black panel of black fondant into that gap, just lightly over the edges, and that will give us the door. And we'll also need, obviously, to cut our door in the fondant. But there's our cake. We now just need to get them panels on it. So what I've done is I've rolled a bit of black fondant and I've cut it out about 1 centimetre wider than that, so that we can lay that into that indent and there'll be a marginal overlap. So what we're going to use is, like I said, some melted white chocolate. Okay, so I'm just going to snip the very end off of that. And we're just going to pipe some of that inside there. Not sticking very well at the minute. It's a bit molten still, this. Okay, a little bit around the edges here to act as the glue. And then just going to pick that up and lay that into that hole, gently pressing it in there, and then just flattening it around the edges, and then just trim it off along the bottom, and then we'll just neaten that up, that bottom edge. I'll just trim that a little bit more in a minute. So that's the doorway done, and then we'll be ready when them panels have hardened a little bit more. We'll start putting it together. Right, so we're now going to start putting these panels on. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some white chocolate on this side. Oops. Okay, and then I'm just going to pick that panel up and stick it on. Now, we don't worry about the edges because we're going to fill that with fondant. What I do need to do is obviously just get rid of any white chocolate that's spilled down onto the green. Okay, I'll sort that in a minute. But it's just now going around the sides, so doing the two door panels, if you like, and the side, and then we'll come to how we get the roof done. So I'll catch up with you when it's time to do the roof. So it's got the panels around the sides, and obviously we've got gaps there. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some fresh red fondant, and we're just going to roll that out. Well, that's not wanting to roll particularly well, this bit. And we're just going to fill them gaps in and then just mould it in to the existing panels. Okay. So that's been filling them gaps in. Now you do have to bear in mind, of course, that the main panels have dried a bit, and also we've got that CMC powder on them, so they've tended to make these extra bits stand out a little minute, but as they dry out they should blend in better. Okay, so I'm just trying to neaten up some of them edges. So, and also we're going to attempt obviously to get rid of some of that powder look on it and give it a bit of a shine afterwards. So our next thing is to put our roof panel on, which, like I say, should overhang slightly at the ends. Okay, so exactly the same as before, white chocolate on top, and then we'll put that panel on. So there's his shack all finished, but of course it wouldn't be quite right without Snoopy. Okay, so what I have done before we get to Snoopy is I have gone over it with an egg white sort of wash. Okay, and that helps absorb some of that powder to help get rid of some of that look. Still got a little bit of shine on it, but that egg white will obviously absorb in. And there's a few places where I just need to check we've got a bit of leakage or a bit of the white chocolate showing, so we'll get rid of that when it's sort of dried a little bit. And also in putting them side panels on, I've exposed a little bit of the coke board there, broken up the green, so I need to just patch that up. So that's the hut finished. So now all we're going to need is some white, and from that we're going to create Snoopy. So I formed his head and his body, and we've got a little red disc which is collar, and then I've got two little legs for him which we're just going to stick on, and then obviously we need some arms, some eyes and a nose. So I'm going to use some little bits of black to do his nose and his eyes, and then, well, I'll show you what comes next. So there's Snoopy lying on top. Okay, I said to you it's going to be something else. So, wait and see. And there we have Woodstock sitting up there. I must admit he looks a bit deformed. It's a bit too soft at the minute. I might have to just tidy him up a little bit because unfortunately the fondant's a bit soft and he's sinking with his head in anyway. But there you go, there is Snoopy Shack. We need to let it dry out a bit. We need to get that glaze a bit better on there. But chocolate cake, nice chocolate buttercream inside, chocolate ganache and plenty of fondant. Snoopy Shack complete with Snoopy and his mate Woodstock.